What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 171. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, Matthew Hoh returns to do his second installment of the Afghan Villain series. Today, he recounts his time in the media after he became a famous whistleblower saying the Obama surge wasn't going to work. And so he talks about how he was treated and how the Pentagon worked against him to keep him out of the media and actually got his, segments canceled and his, quotes and articles pulled at different times, and how all this worked and played out. It's a very revealing, and just like his first interview in this series where he talked about his experience in Congress, it's very shocking and really exposes you to how government works and how these wars go on for so long when they fail, like the war in Afghanistan has. So I really appreciate Matt coming back to the show to talk about this, and I think everybody's going to really enjoy this interview. So be sure you hit the share button no matter where you're listening to the show. Just take that second to hit share, like, and that you're subscribed to the show. Sometimes people get unsubscribed. Also, we know the mainstream, the YouTubes are cracking down, and so whether it's signing up on MeWe for an alternative to Facebook, or signing up on Rumble or Odysee as an alternative to YouTube, take a look at doing that, as well as where you're subscribed on the bigger platforms. And then you could donate to the show at Patreon or Subscribestar, and you could donate crypto with the information in the show notes page. The last thing I want to mention is the sponsor of the show, Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com is the URL, and there you will find an amazing selection of high-quality CBD products. If you're new to Paloma Verde, very easy to check their lab test results to see that their products are high quality and they are what they say they are. And if you're new to CBD entirely, they have a nice education tab on the website where you can see how CBD could help you and what products may be effective in dealing with what you're looking to deal with. So there's so many amazing things that CBD could do. I really like the topicals. I use the CBD sports cream most of the time, most days, and it works very quickly, and it lasts a long time. So if you want to see if you can improve your life a little bit and get some nice CBD products, check out PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Use the promo code PEACE. That gets you a discount, and it gets the show a kickback. All right, here's the interview with Matt Hoh. Hey Matt, welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. How you doing today?
Good, Kyle. Thanks for having me back on.
Well, I'm very to have you back on. Your last appearance on the show, I had a lot of feedback from, especially the story you had about Nancy Pelosi. I get, I just how callous the decision making is and how it goes down isn't something that I think a lot of Americans are always aware of. And so, when they hear this story, especially from somebody like you who was there speaking, it has quite an impact. So I'm thinking that we're going to have a couple more of those today, and I'm really excited to get into it and talk to you about it. I think we're focusing more on the journalists today, and this is the fourth part of the Afghan Villains series and your second appearance on it, Matt. So let's just roll right into it. And who's the first journalist villain we have?
Well, like I did, and thanks for this opportunity to share these stories, Kyle. And yeah, I'm glad some of what I said last time resonated with people. And I mean, give Nancy Pelosi her due. She's good at what, and I think that was the point I made about several others as well. They're good at the internal politics of their jobs, at the politics within their own caucus, within the Congress, and that's how they rise to the top. I mean, but that's again, I mean, I'm not saying anything shocking or revelatory. Very how I mean, there's been study after study, report after report, just the common evidence of it all, that these people in Congress vote for their own self-interest, act in their own self-interest, and not for the interest of their constituents, based upon principles, what's best for the country, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I wanted to share just some stories about journalism. And again, these will all be stories that things I experienced directly. But I think that they fit into the larger reality of American journalism, of U.S. corporate media. One thing I think that's really interesting for me is because I've had a lot of media um, involvement this last couple months, due to the events in Afghanistan and 9/11 anniversary, some personal reasons as well. It's just given me an opportunity to reflect back on what the media was like 12 years ago, and it was definitely different. I mean, just not just just the technological reality of it was different. There was no discussions like you are having right now. I mean, we certainly had podcasts in 2009, but we didn't have podcasts. There are some people doing their own original programming, and in the longer podcast formats were starting to be hammered out, and people were feeling around with it. But a lot of the podcasts, if you remember, 12 years ago, were just radio shows that were, recorded and uploaded onto the internet so that people could listen to a radio show at a later time.
Yep.
I mean, again, there were people who were doing different things with it, but that's what I recall as being and I certainly in 2009 when I had, for people who don't know, after I resigned in protest from my position in the State Department in Afghanistan, I ended up having being on the front page of the Washington Post because of that resignation. The next day, or the day the story came out, I had 75 media requests in 24 hours. And there was no conflicts of interest podcast back then, right? There was no Scott Horton podcast. There was no Bad Faith with Brianna Joy Gray or Useful Idiots with Katie Halper or Matt Taibbi or anything like that, right? Let alone, right? I mean, it really was back 12 years ago, even not that long ago. If you wanted to, if you were going to be in the media, you had to either go to a television studio or you had to be on a landline. Because even then, cell phone was still a little bit scratchy. So they often required you to be on a landline if you're going to call in to the radio program. And the more important thing, not so much the marvel of here we are on Skype and Zoom and, StreamYard and 1,000 other formats and platforms, but the format in the sense of how broad the conversations are now. I think our last conversation was an hour and 20 minutes long. I mean, that's not unusual for a podcast. I mean, I think, you see podcasts that go for 2 hours, 2.5 hours long. You see some podcasts that are 7 minutes long. And so like that variety in format that journalists can now present in is something that wasn't around in 2009. You basically either had in 2009 when you're dealing with the broadcast media, either a 3-minute or so appearance or roughly about 11 minutes. And that was it. Maybe you'd be on something like Charlie Rose or Bill Moyer where you would have 40 minutes, maybe some of the NPR programs, right? That last an hour and you get about 40 minutes of talking in that. But for the most part, most of the media was, either 3 minutes long or maybe about 11 minutes long.
Right. And
so
it's all
right?
broken up too. So like now it would be, hey Matt, that was absolutely fantastic, but we had to head into a commercial break here and it's going to be another 3 minutes before you get to speak, where, on a podcast, I run one ad at the beginning of the show and then the rest of it is just our conversation, which I think is huge too, that, people kind of get to have the conversation as long as they want. Now, like people try to keep it to a certain amount of time or whatever, but it's not like I ever have like a hard break or anything like that, which I think makes a big deal. And also so many of these panels, like, right, they maybe now like they have you on, but they have 3 other people on for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
What do you have? What chance do you have to say anything? So that's one of the things that I think is really big about the podcast scene and YouTube in particular is just, you can have like that continual conversation and everything like that.
Yeah, and I just want to reflect, just basically on that, and of course where we've come as a society in 12 years, politically and intellectually, morally, everything else. I mean, that's a whole different debate. But I thought it'd be just interesting just to kind of reflect on the difference over just in 12 years. What media formats have, and that's definitely had an effect on the media. But I think to start with is that just kind of explaining that, as I said, the day. So I have this big 3,000 word front page above the fold, expose on me, and it garners a lot of attention. Like I said, dozens of media requests. I'm on with Judy Woodruff and Fareed Zakaria, the first guest on the Today Show on a Monday morning. Just like that, and over and over and over again. And I think you have to look at that and wonder whether or not that would have happened now. If I resigned now, if it would have received the same amount of attention, if I would have been given the same amount of access that I received then. And I don't think so. I think, one, my timing was quite good. I resigned in protest of the escalation of the war, and there was a discussion in the United States on that escalation in the fall of 2009. The big debate on the surge in Afghanistan, and so my appearance in the middle of that. But it also, too, the Pentagon and the White House seemed not to be prepared at that point for dissent coming the way I did it via the major media. There had not been, if I can recall, like the public resignations, even for the Iraq War, that occasioned people to be presented as someone who is part of it and then publicly dissented from the war. And so then what you would see is the reaction to that after my appearances. You see the government start to change how it handles the media and how the media reacts and responds. But just to get back to the stories, I have a lot of media coverage, and the seems like the White House and the Pentagon is slow on the uptake, and I'm doing a lot. I'm on MSNBC so often that they've got the shade of makeup for me. The studio up in by American University up there for MSNBC. I would go in there in the makeup room, and they kept. I was on, a couple times a week at least, so they kept my makeup shade, pre-made for me. That's how often I was on. And then, about a month or so though after this, after being on, I start to notice some things. I start to notice some pushback from producers and some questions. And I start to, and where it really solidifies, and this will be the first story, is I'm brought up to New York City to do a show with Dan Rather. And Dan Rather, at that point, if people remember, he had his own hour-long program called something like Dan Rather Reports or whatnot. And he spends about they bring me from DC up to New York to film this, and they spend about 3 hours with me, asking me questions, and then as we're out on the streets of Midtown Manhattan doing B-roll footage, Rather says to me, I know you're right about the war in Afghanistan because I've been going there for 3 decades, and so that's why I know you're right and everything, and it's a very enthusiastic interview. I mean, I can tell that he really likes my answers. It's really engaged. Like, there's some really great content that's going to come out of this. And before I leave, his producer comes up to me and says, can I get your comment on this? And I said, yeah, sure. And he shows me a piece of paper, and it's an email that he had printed out. And it basically is from this communications company, this private communications company, media company, public relations company, whatever you want to call it. And it basically says, this guy, Matthew Hoh, is not who he says he was. He barely was over in Afghanistan for any time. He's making up a lot of what he said he witnessed. He never expressed any doubt or reservation to anybody over there, all just kind of, just discrediting me. And then at the very bottom, the very last paragraph, it says, if this is the type of person that you want to work with, you are not the type of journalist that we want to work with. And who this was a strategic communications firm that represents Central Command. Central Command being the U.S. military command based out of Tampa, Florida. At the time, General David Petraeus was in charge of Central Command, and Central Command had control over the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and the greater Middle East. And so, okay, I say that's ludicrous and whatever. I mean, but then 3 or 4 weeks after I go up there and this program airs on television, I'm nowhere to be seen on the program. Meanwhile, though, they've got a correspondent flying around on helicopters with Stan McChrystal and General Stan McChrystal in Afghanistan, right? So they had gotten their access. So what you see is, the threat, the punishment that the government, the Pentagon, would administer, or the threat of that to journalists, media firms that did not want to go along or presented an opinion that they didn't like. This happens a number of other times. I recall one time having to go on CNN, and I was supposed to be on the program by myself. And at the last minute, they say, hey, we're adding somebody else to this program because we need a neutral and unbiased perspective. And I said, okay. And the person who they add to this program, because this was the person recommended by this strategic communications company that represents General David Petraeus and Central Command, the neutral and unbiased person they added to this program with me was Michael O'Hanlon. And if people don't know Michael O'Hanlon, he has been at the Brookings Institute for a very long time, for the better part of 2 decades at least. He is actually personal friends with, and I'm not exaggerating, he is personal friends with General Petraeus. He has been nothing but a cheerleader for these wars. His organization, the Brookings Institute, is funded by a score of millions of dollars a year from not just from defense contractors, from banks, from fossil fuel corporations, from other organizations that are involved with the war or with militarism, but also directly from the U.S. government itself. It receives money. And this is the person I'm told, the CNN is told you should have on to make sure this program is neutral and balanced, or fair. This happens a number of times. I have interviews that are canceled because of this. I was supposed to do this. I'm originally from New Jersey, and the newspaper I grew up with was the Star Ledger. And in 2009, I must have spent 12, 13 hours talking to a reporter from the Star Ledger, and he just drops off. All of a sudden, just stops talking to me about this story. And what I can gather from another news person who knows the Star Ledger, it's because they were afraid that I was someone who I was not saying I was. This all culminates. It continues going afterwards, of course. But
I'm just curious. Did anybody present you with any actual evidence here, or were they just he isn't who he says he is? Which
it's just yeah.
Okay.
It's just an email coming from these. This strategic communications firm, this public relations firm, saying that, and threatening loss of access, and to make it all the more like it's out of a movie or something like that. I'm standing at the Army Navy Club in Washington D.C. for a Christmas party in 2009. And this guy walks up to me and he introduces himself and he says, hey, I just want to introduce myself. My name's Duncan Boothby, and I am the man who has been discrediting you to all the media here in the United States on behalf of General Petraeus and Central Command. So the chutzpah of it, the gall of it, to walk up to me and say that, right, in the midst of a Christmas party. But that's just that's the environment you're dealing with. That's the people you're dealing with. The concern is not for the truth or for accuracy or for what's right, or it's about either if you're on the media side, gaining access, getting ratings, getting good guests, or if you're on the military side, it's of course protecting your boss, protecting the narrative, keeping public opinion up for the war. We have to remember that General David Petraeus, he wrote his PhD that he received from Princeton University on media relations in regard to the Vietnam War, like what the American military could learn from the media in the Vietnam War. And, and so you see this understanding of the media that really begins in the 1980s by the Pentagon, that the media does not need to be an adversary. The media does not need to be, an enemy, but the media could actually be a very good tool for the military. I wouldn't say the military would ever call the media its friend, because the whole purpose is to manipulate, to co-opt the media. But there's no reason to have the media as an adversary anymore, because it can be utilized. And certainly you see, right, in the Gulf War, how spectacular media relations are with the Pentagon and the major corporate media, including the brand new cable news networks like CNN. How popular the war was, how successful the war was, in terms of ratings for the news media, but also too in terms of public of claiming and guiding and shaping and managing the public understanding of the war, the narrative of the war by the Pentagon. And that is only understood better. It's worked on. It's kind of it's finagled to the point that by the time you get to the Iraq War, or the Iraq War II, I guess, as we should call it, in 2003. You've got a situation where the Pentagon has so skillfully co-opted the media, and the media is all the more happy to go along with it because it's good ratings. So what you have is a very real concern by the media that they're going to get left out, and an understanding by the Pentagon that they have that power, they have that that cudgel, that they can get the media to do what it wants, because they're afraid to miss out, basically, that they are not going to be included on the next trip to Baghdad with General Petraeus, or not going to get to fly around on a helicopter in Kandahar with General McChrystal. You see, and you've seen this. You've seen how good they have gotten at this. And so as I'm going through my media experiences, particularly again 2009 and 2012, you see this over and over again. I had a friend who worked for ABC News, and Martha Raddatz was doing a piece on the war in Afghanistan, and this was in early in 2010. So the whole counterinsurgency debate was still fresh, and people were believing it and buying into it, and the Pentagon was doing everything it can to sell this, right? And my point to my friend, to pass along to Martha Raddatz, was that counterinsurgency is not new. We've been doing this in Afghanistan since the get-go, and I gave her a whole list of quotes from various generals who have been in command in Afghanistan, basically attesting to the fact that what we were doing was counterinsurgency. The way they describe our operations, that's counterinsurgency. Quotes from these generals, who have preceded General McChrystal, talking about how we're going to, using words like, we are going to win the hearts and minds. These guys were saying this. Eichenberry was saying this. I'm blanking on the name of these generals now that we had there, the 6 or 7 that preceded McChrystal. But saying things like, we're going to win the hearts and minds of the population, right? Using pure counterinsurgency doctrine, the terminology, the wording, the euphemisms, all that stuff. And so she brought this to her boss at ABC News, and she was basically told, never bring anything like that here again. Like, what do you think you're going to accomplish with something like that? Like, this doesn't get us, basically, like, you want Raddatz to be left off the helicopter with General McChrystal? You know what I mean? So it wasn't just the information was there for the media to report adversarially on, or at least question, or at least pull out, a quote a quote from a few years before and say, well, General McChrystal, you're saying you're doing this for the first time, but, here's a quote from General, Fancy Pants, who 4 years ago said that, this is what we're going to do. And we're going to separate the enemy from the population. And we're going to, what do you mean you're doing this for the first time here? And that was just something that was not going to be done. And I think you could see that in the quality. If you go back and look at the coverage from that time, the escalation of the war in Afghanistan, that 2009, 2010, 2011 time period, you see very little countering of the Pentagon's narrative, right? You see very little of the very any kind of willingness to go against what the Pentagon was saying, and of course to put people forward who are going to counter that narrative. And this is just not with me. This happens with a number of other people.
Can I ask you a couple of follow-up questions here real quick? So have you ever had a chance to with Dan Rather, you record all this footage and everything, like they've invested some money here, right? And people other than Dan Rather have invested some time in it too, like the cameramen and everything. Like, have you ever been able to confront and actually get them to say exactly why they left you out, or because they are throwing content away that is costly to create and to fly you in and have you what I mean?
No, I never confronted them about it, because I always had the attitude of well, I don't want to burn any bridges, because maybe something will come up in the future and I can then be a part of that, which is just that's just a kind of a tactical decision on my part to be tactful, right? And to try and don't burn, these guys still have audiences of hundreds of thousands or millions of people. So no, they would be apologetic at times. Ratings has a lot to do with this. So it's not just, when I look at the media, I look at three things in terms of trying to understand why the media is so pro-war, right? Why are they in line with the Pentagon? And I guess it should be four. The one is the fact that these are all elite establishment institutions. These are all the province of the oligarchs, right? And so there is a link among them, and they realize that if one is weakened, the others can be weakened, because they are at the top of a society that has been constructed. It's not a natural construction. This is an artificial construction of society we have with these established institutions at the top, and nothing. Moses did not put them there, type of thing, right? These things are all breakable, and so the concern is to do damage upon each other, and then that extends as well to the people within the institutions. So these are all friends. They all know each other. They all want to do favors for one another. They go to cocktail parties together. They go to dinners together. These are people who are friends. That is the correct way to put it. So people know Danny Davis, who was a active duty Army lieutenant colonel who in February 2012 went to the Congress with a classified report he had written. He had just been a year in Afghanistan. He comes back. He spends months putting together this classified report, goes to Congress with it. This report shows that the generals are lying about Afghanistan. This is what the report has. General Petraeus said this about the war. This is what the actual data looks like. Right? General Petraeus referred to this report, or he referred to this assessment, and he said A, but you know what? The report, that assessment actually says B. He goes to Congress with a classified report about this. Of which about 6 members out of 535 actually look at that report. As everyone knows, Danny is, of course, completely vindicated by history. You knew at the time, if you were paying attention to this, that he was correct. But, of course, course of events, as well as things like the Afghan papers published by the Washington Post, that document and demonstrate clearly the, decades of lying by the U.S. government at, whether it be civilian or military, about the war in Afghanistan, the systemic lying about it. Danny has written this and provided this to Congress in 2012. To Danny's credit, I mean, to the New York Times credit, they do put Danny on the front page for this, right? But similar to me, and I'm going to get to the relationship point in a minute, but similar to me, where I was in 2009 on the front page of the Washington Post, when I asked the a reporter who wrote that story, Karen DeYoung, who was a big reporter. I mean, she traveled at that point with Secretary Clinton. She had been Colin Powell's biographer. She knew lots of people at the White House, the National Security Council, the CIA, the State Department, the Pentagon. When I asked her, I said, Karen, why did you put me on the cover of the Post like this and give me, so much political capital? She said, well, everyone I asked, again, at the White House, the State Department, the CIA, the Pentagon, whether or not they agreed with you and what you said in your resignation letter about the war in Afghanistan, everyone agreed with you, but no one would say differently on record. And that's why I gave you so much room. So you've got that, right? You've got Danny on the front page of the New York Times. I can tell you that in the 12 years since I was on the front page of the Washington Post about the war of Afghanistan, and I believe, proven correct by time, as many of us have been, most of the people listening to this program, many of you all predate me in your opposition to the war, and I'm very aware of that. I've never been contacted by the Washington Post for a comment on anything, right? After they had me on the front page, about the war, they've never published an op-ed of mine. I think they've published one letter of mine, one letter to the editor one time out of 12 years. That's it. And Danny is the same with the New York Times. So you have these types of, the same as you see today with the Washington Post, with the publication of the Afghan papers. You have these kind of like one-offs where they do these, they'll cover a story, they'll cover an event, they'll have a big expose like the Afghan papers, or a whistleblower like Danny Davis on the cover of their paper. And the other 99% of their coverage is pro-war. I heard this one time clearly stated. Diane Rehm, who used to be a big, people remember, a big host on NPR. And Diane Rehm would have people like Tom Ricks on all the time. Tom Ricks, who is buddy-buddy with a lot of the generals, and who Ricks turns against the war at some point around 2014, 2015 or whatever. But certainly in 2009, 2010, 2011, he is very supportive of the wars. And other people like Ricks. Max Boot, or other commentators like that, people from the Center for New American Security, or from the Institute for, excuse me, I'm blanking on the name now of these places, the Institute for Study of War, or other, think tanks that are not just pro-war, but are so overtly funded by the defense industry and the Pentagon, State Department, CIA, that, the whole thing is just a farce. But, one time I did hear Diane Rehm defend her. Someone did ask her about the coverage on her program on the wars. And she said, I've had Phyllis Bennis on. Phyllis Bennis from the Institute for Policy Studies, who's been great on these things forever. And, I asked Phyllis, I said, how many times have you been on Diane Rehm's show? I asked her, separately after reading that. She said once. So for the fact that, but they had her on, right? So that means like we're doing our due diligence. We had Matthew Hoh on the front page of the Washington Post. We had Danny Davis on the front page of the New York Times. I mean, it is so incongruent, right? That you can look at the Washington Post now and look at, say, the Afghan papers reporting that they did, which again, they themselves say it, just systemic lying by the U.S. government on the war of Afghanistan since the inception of the war. It never let up. Write this huge report, spend 3 years in court. Again, to your point about the money they spend on these things, they spent 3 years in court trying to get those papers from the Department of Defense. And then they just ignore it in almost all their other coverage. Right? You just guys wrote this huge ass thing with it's clearly demonstrating how the war has been one giant collection of lies, orchestrated lies. And you're just going to breathlessly republish any anonymous quote you get from Foggy Bottom or the Pentagon or from out in Langley or from the White House. Right? But I think what they do is they have that to say, look, we have given the other side. We have shown shown some dissent. We have provided a counter or an adversarial opinion, or we have done our due diligence as journalists. But I was talking about the relationships aspect. So what happens with Danny Davis is Danny, after he's gone to the New York Times, and it's interesting to see because I was fall of 2009, Danny is winter 2012. The difference in the way his coverage was handled. And arguably, Danny had a bigger story than I did because Danny had gone still in uniform, active duty lieutenant colonel. I won't even say arguably. It was a bigger story. It was a bigger deal. I had resigned. I had quit. I was risking nothing. Danny was risking a lot. He goes to Congress with this classified report. He's got the documentation there. He is saying that generals are lying to you about the war. They're lying to you about they're lying to you, Congress. They're lying to the American public. They're lying to the president about the war. Here's the proof. New York Times puts it on the front page. It gets a kind of a little burst, and then it just fizzles out. And I'm at dinner one night, and Danny and I now have a mutual friend who was a producer at 60 Minutes. And 60 Minutes was going to do a thing on Danny. And literally the morning of that they're supposed to do the show, they get a call. The 60 Minutes producer gets a call from the office of the president of CBS News, who at that time was, I'm assuming, was Les Moonves, saying, "You will not do this story on Danny Davis." Right? So call down from the office of the president of CBS News to a producer at 60 Minutes saying, "You will not do this story." Leslie, the producer there, says she, in her however many decades of working in the business, including being at 60 Minutes for a very long time, she had never seen anything like that. And her assumption, of course, was that Moonves is friends with General Petraeus, and it's just a simple conversation, right? It's just a phone call from a 4-star general at the Pentagon or, wherever, Kabul, to the president of CBS News. "Hey, buddy, do me a favor, cancel this." And there's a lot of discrediting. There's a lot of in my case with the discrediting, they did the same thing to Danny. They and you see the same thing too. Say with you look at right now what's happening with Ambassador Daniel Foote, the man who was the U.S. Special Envoy to Haiti, who resigned last week over the situation in Haiti, over the deportations, et cetera, et cetera. And immediately the response is from the White House and the State Department is to discredit him, is to say that he was abrasive, abusive, that he never communicated any of these doubts. They put the seed with me. They did the same thing with me that they did with Ambassador Foote. You see it done with, say, Ed Snowden, with Chelsea Manning. They did it. Daniel Hale, John Kiriakou. Like in my case, what they did is they put, and again, I had nothing. Mine is nothing compared to what any of those people went through. So that I am very chagrined to be including myself in the list of those folks. So please understand that. But just to give you my personal story, the strategic communications firm that's discrediting me, they set up a fake Wikipedia page about me. Not a fake Wikipedia page, a real Wikipedia page about me. And it's 80%, 85% of it's true. But there's stuff in there, there's there's a quote in there, among other things, that says Matthew Hoh has never answered questions as to the they made it sound as if someone someplace had brought up the fact that I had offered up dissent before I had gone to Afghanistan, and I was going to Afghanistan just to burnish and bolster my credentials so that I could do this great noble act of resignation and come back and be a hero to the anti-war community and become land a lucrative gig in the peace in the peace business, right? I mean, this is what's kind of presented
similar
there.
to the claim they made about Daniel Hale, right?
Exactly.
That he joined that
right.
firm to get that information, and that's why what he did was so terrible and wrong.
That's exactly right. And what you will have is it does just enough to scare off media producers, bookers, because one thing you have to realize about the corporate media is when you go to Fox or MSNBC or CNN and you meet these producers, the bookers, really, the ones that are in charge of getting people on the air, they're 24, 25 years old. they're starting out. This is an entry level job for them in the news business, and what they have is they have they're told 3 or 4 hours before that. Maybe they know the day before. Sometimes maybe, but a lot of times they don't know until 3 or 4 hours before their show what they're talking about. So they may be told, hey, okay, it's 1 o'clock. We're on the air at 5 o'clock. You need to find us somebody to talk about the war in Afghanistan, someone to talk us about the vaccines, someone to talk about Britney Spears, Britney Spears, conservatorship, and get us a good news story about dogs or kittens or baked goods or something like that. I mean, so if they are going to go with whatever is easiest for them, whatever's already packaged for them. And if there's any doubt, right? So there's just sowing these seeds of doubt, like, is a very effective thing, as well as to the relationships. I mean, there's also the ratings. One time number of times, but tell you the egregious one, but the one that makes more sense. If people remember back in the fall of 2009, Barack Obama had his first state dinner, I think with the Prime Minister of India, I think. And there was this couple who crashed the state dinner, and they were known as the White House dinner crashers. And, one time I got bumped off of Hardball with Chris Matthews for the White House dinner crashers. And that producer called me and was very apologetic and said, this is unfortunately the way it is that, we have to go for ratings first and not, discussion about the, potential consequences of a war, But there are other times that, after I was on the Today Show once, they booked me 2 other times to be on the Today Show. And both times I was brought up to New York for it. And, at 5 o'clock in the morning, as I'm getting ready to go over to the show or whatever, or whatever time it was, the producer calls me and says, hey, you're not on today. And what happened in both occasions was that the White House found out I was going to be on, and they offered up, the first time they offered up Bob Gates, and the second time they offered up Joe Biden. And one of those times, I can't remember if it was the first time or the second time, Matt Lauer was preparing to go to Afghanistan, and he had liked me, I guess, when he first met me or whatever, but he invites me over to his office and, after the show, and I talked to him for about 90 minutes. And he says to me, you're doing a really good job, because they were afraid to let you on. So they found out that you were going to be on, and they offered us the Secretary of Defense. And then they found, and they offered us next time Joe Biden. So they'll do that besides like the cudgel to try and, scare people away, right? Not to make sure people are behaving and who their guests are and what their coverage are and what take on the narrative is. They'll also offer up more high profile guests, better guests, right? And honestly, if you're a producer at the Today Show, who are you going to choose? This dude who quit his job in Afghanistan, or the vice president of the United States? I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. So there's that ratings part of it as well that is so very important. And if you talk to some people, if you read the kind of work like there's a woman named Ariana Pekary, who last year, her name's spelled Pekary, who last year resigned from MSNBC as an act of conscience, because she just couldn't go along with being in that type of media industry any longer, or a ratings-based media industry. I mean, because it sacrifices truth, journalistic ethic, principles, whatever, for ratings. And so you see that along with this desire for access is this concern about ratings. And then, of course, you have to remember the other part about it, the fourth part, I guess, about trying to understand why the media is the way it is with regards to the wars and their relationship to the Pentagon and everything, is the fact that, and there's a journalist named Paul Jay who's done a lot of great work on this. But Jay notes that, about 95% of the S&P 500 is owned by the same 4 or 5, wealth management firms, money management firms, like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. These massive banks, basically, are the principal shareholders for about 95% of the S&P 500, including right? The defense industry, the fossil fuel industries, the media companies. If you're interested in this, when you're done listening, go and just look up and see who the actual owners of CNN and Fox and everything else are. Not in the sense of who but what other companies are included within that corporation. And you'll see how the Hollywood and everything else is involved with the news media. They're all part of a conglomerate. But that conglomerate itself is owned by these massive wealth management banks. And nobody gets to senior levels in any industry. You don't get to senior level anywhere without understanding the unwritten rules, without understanding the needs of the organization, the needs of the bosses, what it is okay to cross, what's not okay to cross. And so certainly you won't find it written down anyplace. But the boards of directors and then the C-level suite at these media firms are fully aware that the banks that are the principal shareholders want to see growth in all their businesses, all their holdings. And so that's why you don't see, I think, in corporate media, especially say television corporate media, the CNNs, the Foxes, the NBC Nightly News, the CBS Nightly News, et cetera, you don't see the criticism of other established corporations, especially the defense industry, the fossil fuel industry. The other thing, too, is that, people will ask me sometimes, hey, how come I'm watching Meet the Press and there's an advertisement for Lockheed on Meet the Press? And, it's not like I'm going to go buy an F-35. Well, that advertising, I don't believe, is geared towards the person sitting at home watching Meet the Press, watching Chuck Todd, whatever. It's just to make sure that ad buy is to purchase the adherence of Meet the Press to the needs and desires of that company, right? So if Lockheed does a continual advertisement purchase for Meet the Press or for whatever, or Boeing does it, whoever, this way you're always going to have a Tom Cotton on. You're always going to have a Lindsey Graham on. You're always going to have someone, who represents the interests of the advertiser. And you're never going to have a discussion that goes against the interest of the advertiser. So there's a lot to it that, that formulates this media contraption, this organism that exists that allows it and pushes it and causes it to be pro-war, because, that's certainly what we see it as.
Yeah, and I will put the link in the show notes page, but we have a new article out at antiwar.com this week where the author goes through, the title of the article is How the Media Brainwashes You, but he actually goes to the profile pages, I think on Bloomberg, of Viacom, Gladstone, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and shows how, I guess not Gladstone, but how Gladstone, State Street, and Viacom in particular are major holders of all these media and military industrial complex companies. And one of the things I was thinking when I was reading that is, I'm sure then that State Street probably has a Christmas party or whatever, or BlackRock does, right? And then when they have the Christmas party, they probably invite the heads of all these other companies that they own large shares of, right? And so I'm sure the head of Lockheed Martin has had dinner with the head of CBS, right? And that they're relatively good friends. And maybe the head of Lockheed Martin is just able in those conversations to be just as your friend, that Matthew Hoh guy, I don't know if I let him on your, he might just say something you don't want, saying it that way. And it doesn't have to, I think sometimes people think it's there's a memo handed down. It could even be far less nefarious than that, just how all these companies are combined and kind of stew in the same pot.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever maybe that specific, but there certainly is an elite consensus, right? What you call the Washington consensus that exists among all these people who, go to these dinner parties together, who attend these events together, who are at the black tie, who marry one another. Look at the senior foreign correspondent from NBC Nightly News, Andrea Mitchell, is married to Alan Greenspan, the former Federal Reserve. They intermarry, they know each other. You're talking about the top levels here here. And it's just that conventional wisdom that's shared among them. So, if you do, you hear, I think maybe this is why, we have other topics that are kind of forbidden to be spoken about on the national media, that maybe they maintain broad popular support among the American public, but they are not really referenced or spoken about because it goes against the interests of all those who would be at that cocktail party, and it would be awkward to be there if your network or your paper or whatever is on has a narrative that is contradictory towards the interests of those who are in the room with you. And you see that again. It's as you said. There's the former relationships where they are all owned by the same banks. These conglomerates own other mass, a very diverse group of holdings of corporations, and then the individuals themselves are intermingling, becoming friends, having relationships, wanting to be continued back to be invited in these things. I mean, one of the things you should look at, like with the conglomerates, like say Viacom, that owns CBS News, but also say Paramount movie studios. And we know that Pentagon's relationship with the Hollywood is very heavy-handed. That I think people are familiar with the idea that the Pentagon will provide tanks and boats and fighter planes and stuff like that if they like your script. But it's even worse than that. It's more heavy-handed than that, in the sense that the Pentagon has such to give you an idea, if people remember the film, the Tom Hanks film, Captain Phillips, was it, about the
Somali pirates?
Yeah, the Somali pirates and the Navy SEALs rescue them and everything. It's something like, the estimates are that as much as $50 million was saved by the studio, by the U.S. Navy being involved in that film. When you talk about the use of the ships, when you talk about the use of the crew members of the ships, when you talk about then not needing the CGI to do all that, the estimates are close to $50 million were saved. And the Pentagon knows this. So if you're at Paramount, Kyle, and you've got this great anti-war script, or even a script about, veteran suicide or just anything, well, Paramount is not going to push that forward because they're afraid that, and I don't know who, they're afraid that the next Captain Phillips won't get the support that it needs from the Pentagon if they do this anti-war film. I mean, the Pentagon is incredibly vindictive. It has an incredible long memory. The purposes of the Pentagon, say Hollywood office, just as their public relations office, is to manipulate and control and utilize, not to be friends. The Pentagon's public relations budget runs in the billions of dollars every year. I think it's close to $10 billion a year is what the Pentagon spends on public relations, because you have to include recruiting, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you have to include recruiting in that, and that's a multi-billion-dollar a year, So the Pentagon is the largest public relations firm in the world. So what you have is, and we know that, say, with the Hollywood scripts, what will happen is, the Pentagon has a right. They review them, they censor them, they rewrite them, and so yeah, if you're at one of the big studios, Fox or Paramount or Sony or whatever, and you've got a script in front of you that the Pentagon might object to, and you've got the next Transformers film coming up that is going to use a whole heck of a lot of military products in, and is going to save you a lot of money and look really good and make you a lot of money. Well, you're not going to go with that smaller, and so you have to remember this in the sense that CBS News is adjacent to Paramount Films. They're all part of the same conglomerate. So, again, and it's not like you're going to find this written someplace, but the people who get to the top of these organizations, whether they be at the board, at the C level, as a senior vice president, what have you, they're smart enough to know that these relationships exist, that this coexistence exists, that this symbiosis exists between all these corporations and the Pentagon. And so, yeah, they're not going to buck it.
Yeah, and one of the things Scott Spalding pointed out when he did his villains part on Hollywood is just how petty they are about it. Where apparently they had an issue with the first Independence Day movie about Will Smith's wife being a stripper, which honestly, like when I was growing up, like first I didn't get it, but then I thought it was cool. Like about the time that like I was a guy my age would be considered joining the military, like that kind of seems like a perk. Maybe a little later in life you feel differently, but yeah.
I think his wife was Vivica Fox. Like, who would not want exactly? If I join the military, I'm going to be a fighter pilot and get a wife like Vivica Fox. Absolutely, man. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So anyways, one of the last things I want to ask you is just like, so obviously you said that you haven't been like experienced this as much as maybe a Kiriakou or a Chelsea Manning, but this is like kind of a crazy thing, right? Like if you just told somebody, like a buddy of yours that doesn't really, care or think about these things too much, like, hey, the Pentagon is trying to discredit me, they may say like, you're a little bit paranoid, but this kind of thing like does happen. And so I just, wonder like how it affects you, because this is like the most powerful organization in the world, like picking you out to personally discredit you.
Yeah. And with very effective tools and a lot of money behind it. And it was effective. Like it wasn't completely effective. It wasn't a total shakedown of these producers. I was still getting on television and everything else, but you could see the effect, right? The transition that then as Danny Davis comes out, there's less media attention to him. And then as you start getting the stories of, the Chelsea Manning story is pretty much controlled from the start by the Pentagon narrative. I mean, they're planning all kinds of things about how she was confused about her sexuality, and she released these documents just to impress somebody she had met in a bar. I mean, this is the stuff that they're putting out that is being discussed on NPR, that's being discussed in the Washington Post, that is causing the people at CBS Nightly News to maybe we shouldn't talk about this. I mean, remember when Ed Snowden, when he does what he does, and everyone knew that Ed Snowden's girlfriend was a stripper, but hardly anyone knew that Ed Snowden actually had joined the Army and had been in Green Beret training and had broken his leg or something, and that's why he wasn't in the Army. That's how he ends up in the NSA. Right, is because he washes out of Green Beret training for an injury. Nobody knows that, but everyone knows that Ed Snow's girlfriend's a stripper. So they either if it's the story is too big for them to suppress, then they try and hijack the narrative and discredit the person and make the conversation about the individual rather than what the individual. I mean, how often did we hear about Julian Assange? Right, about Assange's behavior, about how he didn't shower. He had those phony sexual assault charges in Sweden. All these things manufactured to, well, we can't hide that story, so we're going to make the story about the person and make it be a character discussion, as opposed to actually talking about the war crimes or the government spying that these people have exposed. Others, they're successful in being able to, really limit. I mean, how many people know Tom Drake's name? How many people know Jess Raddick's name? How many people know John Kiriakou's name, Jeffrey Sterling's name? I mean, Daniel Hale, I don't think he's gotten much of the coverage that he would have gotten 10 years ago. And a lot of that coverage has been done in a way that it's, well, did this person help or harm American security? Right. I mean, where it's a loaded question about the individual, as opposed to, this is what Daniel Hale, I mean, we shouldn't even know Daniel Hale's name. I mean, we should know his name, but the importance is not Daniel himself. And I'm a friend of Daniel, so I'm not saying, he's not
Right.
important or anything, right? But the importance is what, and this is what Dangle would say as well. The importance is what he brought forward, of what he showed, of like the fact that, geez, the U.S. government knows that 90% of the people it kills with its drones are not the intended targets. They know this, and they keep doing it, and they keep lying about it. I mean, so you have that this manipulation, or this character assassination in order to manipulate the conversation, if the story is too big to completely hide it.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I really thought that John Kiriakou was a nobody at the CIA because that's, I was like
That's
in
right.
high school at the time and I just kind of picked that up. I remember the Fox News host that I watched like mispronounced his name for quite a while. Like it just made him sound like so, like a nobody. Like his name can't even be pronounced. Like if you can't figure out how to pronounce somebody's name, then like they're not important. He was probably scrubbing toilets and overheard something. Is kind of the way they make it sound when you find out that like no, this guy like was a big shot at the CIA and knew all the heads and was around them and like knew what was going on, and it's never portrayed that way. It's just interesting, like being able to reflect on it because again, like this happened so long ago that yeah, I didn't know the truth and like was just believed whatever I saw on TV, and so yeah, I just kind of like ate up. Oh yeah, this was a nobody, so why listen to what he has to say at all? Like he's like blowing the whistle, but he doesn't understand what this program's actually doing and everything like that because he's a like you said, a low ranking nobody. And
Yeah.
I'm we
Yeah.
have like time for like one more. If if that's all you have, then we could wrap up. But if you got one more, I'd love to hear it, Matt.
Well, I think I just want to make sure people aren't saying like there's some cabal that meets together, right, in a dark room someplace, smoky dark room in D.C. of these media executives and defense corporations and Pentagon people, and they hammer out like a strategic vision and a plan of actions and milestones together. And, it's more along this is how it forms. I mean, there certainly is, again, going back to the Pentagon, there certainly is the co-opting of the media. I mean, the Pentagon's 2003 invasion of Iraq, they're co-opting of the media there, where they're embedding the journalists, right, with military units, having the journalists live for months at a time with these young men and women, forming these bonds, these relationships. So of course, how are they going to write? They've gotten to know these kids. They love these kids. How can you not love those kids? I mean, they're 20, 21, 22-year-old soldiers. How could you not love them? And then, how are you going to write anything adversarial? So, I mean, it's very brilliant, but like you see, certainly, like I said, the media, I feel like, goes along with it pretty willingly up until maybe around 2005, 2006. Then, but you see the shifting of how the Pentagon, the U.S. government handles the media. So by the time I think by the time you get to 2013, 2014, you've had a real it's difficult to find people on the major media networks after 2013, 2014 in opposition to the wars. And I think people can see that most recently these last couple months. Danny Davis has been an exception. Danny has been on CNN and Fox. But, occasionally I got on MSNBC one time to talk about what happened in Afghanistan. I know Phyllis Bennis has been on once. I mean, like it's few and far between. I think Scott Horton got on Fox once or twice. It's few and far between in terms of dissident voices or people opposed to the policy getting on. And there's a lot to it. Again, it goes back to ratings. I mean, war is popular. It goes back to not wanting to upset relationships that are established between institutions and individuals, as well as the whole ownership by the same banks. So the profitability of all this. You don't want to lose access. So those are the things I think people should be looking for as they, try and critique the media or understand the media and its relationship to how the wars are discussed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the thing isn't necessarily even that, you or I would say that it has to be like just panels of Matthew Hoh,
Yeah.
Danny Shergen, and Scott Horton talking about Afghanistan. But if you're gonna have on David Petraeus, you should also have on Matthew Hoh, maybe. You know what I mean? Oh, you're concerned about like character issues? Well, David Petraeus has a long list of them that I'm sure you can't match. So you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
obviously that isn't like a limiting fact. Like that isn't something that disqualifies that they're worried about character issues, because if the person is saying things that they want to hear, they'll put them right back on the air. They again, Petraeus, like Jeffrey Toobin is back on the air already. Like all these people, like nothing like that's ever happened with you, and yet they just, oh well, one person said something questionable about your reputation. Another thing is I'm really not so sure that helicopters surpass, like, pictures of journalists in helicopters really surpass that much. Like if Americans could like sit down and hear what you have to say, I know, like, just with my small audience, when like people hear what you have to say, like they're impressed, they want to hear more, people want you back on the show and everything like that. I think that would potentially be the outcome, but they're I guess maybe just so stuck in their thing, like it looks cool to fly in helicopters and that footage and everything like that. Also, you could probably run it again and again and again.
Well, there's also too. There's I don't want to bring out the political connection. There's a connection between the Republican White Houses and Fox News, and clear connection between MSNBC and the Democratic White Houses. Cenk Uygur, who hosts the Young Turks and who used to have a show on MSNBC, this was the crux of his MSNBC claims. I think they fired him. He claims he quits, whatever. But this was the crux of the dispute, was that Cenk was saying, I don't want to be, I don't want to just be a parrot for the White House, and you see that. And I feel like I had that experience myself a bit, because if you go back and you recall that, so Barack Obama comes in the office, he escalates the war in Afghanistan. That kind of culminates in December of 2009 with a speech he gives at West Point. And he says that we're going to escalate the war. We're going to surge to victory in Afghanistan. In 18 months, we're going to bring the troops home, and we'll have won, basically. And so what happens is, particularly with MSNBC, their coverage of the war, I feel, as it gets closer to that point in mid-2011, when Barack Obama had said we're going to start pulling the troops out, and when the United States does start drawing down on its forces in Afghanistan, you start to see more critical coverage of the war. I wouldn't say that it's anti-war, but I would say you do have more adversarial voices, but they're adversarial against the war, but they're in favor of the White House. So you have that as well, where we do have a thing with particularly Fox and MSNBC, which are the two largest cable news networks, are mouthpieces at times for the political goals of the and both the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were political goals for the White House. I mean, both of them, in my estimation, with Bush for Iraq and then Obama for Afghanistan, both of those wars were meant as domestic political victories more than anything else for the president, for the glory of the presidency, right? To make these guys successful wartime commanders in chief and win your election. So you have that as well, where these media outlets will do the bidding of the White House in terms of trying to help shape public opinion to match a narrative to accomplish some type of political goal.
Absolutely. And they have the 24-hour news cycle all day long. And even if there's like maybe one good segment, like during the Trump administration, you get like Douglas McGregor on Tucker Carlson, but the rest of the day is just, war hawks all the way down the line or something like that. And so, anyways,
yeah, they definitely seem to have a formula for ratings. First in primary is their Team Red versus Team Blue formula, right? So a guy like you and I, Kyle, we would never make it just for that reason, right? Neither of us are Democrats or Republican, so we would not make it onto those programs really anymore. I mean, and that really, Fox has that model. I could tell a funny story, a kind of funny story. I did Senator Tom Cotton. I knew Tom actually in Afghanistan in 2009. He was a really nice guy, decent guy. not at all what he's like as a senator. Not, I mean, he's very bright, very articulate. I knew him for about a week in Afghanistan. I just happened to be at his base for a week, and he was the type of guy. If you needed anything, he would help you out. Decent, good dude, you know. And then when I resigned and I'm on Fox, and all of a sudden I'm debating this guy named Tom Cotton. Oh shit, that's, I know Tom, and we were on together 2 or 3 times on Fox, at least, maybe more. I think we were on Larry King together one time. But anyway, he calls me, and we got to be friendly because we know each other in the green room and everything. And he actually at one point says to me, we should, and he's representing like some conservative veterans group that's in favor of escalating the war, right? And
Of course.
yeah, what he says though is he calls me and says, I just got a call from Fox. You and I are not going to be on anymore together. And I said, oh, what happened? And he said, well, they said you guys are too cordial to each other. Right. So, I mean, there's that atmosphere, too, where it's got to be theatrical. People have to want to watch it. So just watching two dudes in their 30s or whatever talk about the war and politely, disagreeing with one another is not what the Fox producers felt was beneficial to their ratings. So yeah, I mean, that's a whole other story about Cotton, and I think he learned a lot from those appearances, from having like that type of event happen to him, where he was told, look, you're too polite, you're too cordial, you're too professional, you're too businesslike. We don't want that on our channel. And if you're going to run as a Republican in Arkansas, I think you take that to heart, and you become like a Neanderthal like he is now, which is entirely not who he is. I mean, you meet the guy, or at least when I knew him, you're like, oh, I totally believe this guy went to Harvard Law School. I mean, right? I mean, like, this is what a Harvard Law grad I would expect to meet. Very bright, capable. But yeah, I mean, so you have a lot of things that factor into it. But what it really does, though, is all that you add it all up, and you get this system again that is in favor of war. I mean, it's simple as that. And there are all aspects of journalism that are we can be critical. I mean, you see all these members of defense corporations. They're on the boards of directors, or they're consultants, or they've got some financial interest at stake, which would be a conflict of interest, to plug the name of your show. I mean, clear conflicts of interest on the television all the time that are never addressed. General Jack Keane is on Fox News all the time. And, he has loads of money coming in every year from the defense industry. And to not address that, I don't think Keane would be saying anything differently if he didn't have that money coming in. But it is an actual real conflict of interest that very rarely gets disclosed on these television programs, and also too in print, because you see the Times doing it, the Post and the LA Times and the USA Today all the time quoting these people who work for organizations that take loads of money from the defense industry, and sometimes directly from the Pentagon and State Department and National Security Council itself.
All right, Matt. I think that's a great place to wrap it up. Thanks so much for doing the show again. You're at Matthew P. Hoh on Twitter. Where else can people find you, follow you, support what you're doing?
Sure. You can go to, I've got a blog, which I update once every few months, I guess. It's MatthewHoh.com. And then you can, check out the work of the Eisenhower Media Network or Center for International Policy.
All right. Thank you again for coming on.
Hey, thanks, Kyle.